the literal answer for building wealth is time and market, which is as soon as you can start investing, you should, even if it's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of money. And so when you look at the long chart, and the biggest advantage you have when you're young when it comes to investing is time. And so don't be in such a hurry to hit some milestone or make some money tomorrow that you forget that your biggest asset is time.
Sarah Kunst typically says no to invitations for podcasts. So family, I'm thrilled that she said yes to us. And wow, do we have an amazing conversation with her. You know, she's the managing director at Cleo Capital, where she's investing in the next generation of game-changing startups. From working at iconic brands like Apple and Chanel, she became a VC in 2013 when almost nobody who looked like her was in the field. She's been intentionally changing that landscape ever since. Today, we're going to talk about her journey, what she's learned about money and investing, and how she's using her platform to create opportunities for others. Sit back, enjoy, or run, enjoy, or walk, enjoy. Plainly said, let's enjoy a conversation with Sarah Kunst. Hey, Sarah, thank you for joining us at Ask JBH today. Now, before we dive into the business side, let's understand the foundation upon which you've built a beautiful career and a service to so many. One thing I know you said is that the best career advice you ever received was your excuses suck. I think that's a pretty good place for us to start, and it's quite direct. So why don't you share with us those early influences and experience that helped shape this kind of no-nonsense approach to life and business?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I started in a relatively no nonsense place. My first two jobs were on a farm. I'm from a small farming town in Michigan, in rural Michigan, and so was always raised to work hard, quite literally. When I was like 11, I wanted a little extra spending money, and my parents said, "Well, then you better get a job." And one of their friends owned a farm, so I was a strawberry picker. And so, I have always worked hard, and I've always known that, if you want something, you're going to have to work for it. And so for me, over time in my career, it really became about, how do I find things I enjoy working on? If you have to work, if you know that you're spending, huge swaths of your waking life working, then think about what would make you enjoy that, what would make that feel meaningful to you. And for me, it's always been people and money, just to be really candid. And so I love people. I love spending time with people. I love talking to people. I'm not somebody who could sort of work in a lab all day or work all on my own all day. And I also always knew that I like stuff. And so I wanted money, both because I have a very bad jewelry habit and because I found early that, money makes it harder to oppress people. Money gives you a lot of freedom, whether that's, as a woman, as a person of color, you have a lot more options in life when you have money. And so when I sort of looked at those two things, I ended up in marketing, I ended up in business development, in sales, and then finally in venture capital investing.
Well, your journey is a beautiful one, and you've been quite transparent about it. Let me just share that we have a commonality in one thing you mentioned, and that is that we both worked on the earth, because in my early life, when I needed money, forget about what I wanted, girl, just what I needed for book fees, etc. Back when I was in school, you still paid for your books. And I'm talking elementary through, high school. And so I worked in tobacco. I worked on a farm. It wasn't our farm. And I was hired hand. And then I have to tell you though, saying I worked in tobacco, Sarah, is not fair, because I didn't last very long there once those tobacco worms came up. But I think what I'm sharing here is that we have a commonality in our theme of how we approach life. You work hard for what you want. I think you work smart about it as well. I mean, you shared before that your relationship with money started young. Learning how to earn, how to negotiate, and how to save were certainly a part of that as well. So how did those experiences shape your view of success and ownership? And how did you actually come into the theme of, I'm now not just earning, I'm negotiating, I'm saving, I'm creating a platform for my life from the money I earn. I think that's something that a lot of adults today struggle with. And you got there pretty early in life.
I got there really early. When I was little, I remember my parents had a rule, which was they gave us kind of bigger allowances, but we had to buy our essentials. And so, I had to buy not my own food, but I had to budget to decide if I wanted to spend money on a really fancy backpack or if I wanted to use the backpack from last year and then spend that on some new school clothes. And I had to buy my own toiletries, my own shampoo, my own hair products. And I remember I was like 11 or 12 and I told my parents, I thought it was very cool. I was like, I want to shave my head. And they're like, absolutely not. Stop listening to Sinead O'Connor. You're not shaving your head. This was like when punk rock was kind of cool. I wanted to shave. So I made a deal with them. I said, if you don't let me shave my head, you have to give me more money for shampoo because my brother had very short hair, so he didn't need to use as much shampoo. And this is, sexist. This is like the pink tax, right? And they were like, honestly, sure, whatever. Like, here you go. Here's like $2 extra a month or whatever. But I learned early. And then the funny thing is, I was buying Suave because, it was $1 and it was just like the professional, the Redken brand. So I was sort of arbitraging, getting an extra dollar or two a month to basically not shave my head, and then buying the cheapest shampoo and conditioner I could find. And then I had extra spending money. And so for me, it was always really the sort of literalness of money has always been important to me, which is if you have more, you can buy more. Luckily, I was not introduced to credit cards early because then I might have just gone a different path. But I said, I want more things. And so I need to find a way to earn more or to generate more money that I have. There's one other very sort of notorious incident in my family where my dad told me, if you don't smoke until you're 18, if you've never smoked, touched a cigarette, I'll pay you $1,000 because it was important to him that I not smoke, because smoking's terrible for you. And I was like, okay. And then I bring it up to him. I was like 12. I bring it up to him when I'm 18, and he's like, I don't think I said that. Here's $100. Right. And so there he still owes me a bit, but he's made it up to me. But I was motivated by money and looking at ways to sort of grow it. And then I started to take that into my jobs as well. And so in college, at university, I had like 4 different jobs because I was a campus representative for big brands. And I realized that they were paying me sort of a set amount each month, but they didn't care if I was repping 3 brands at once. And so instead of working, 12 hours a week for 3 hours on each brand, I could work 3 hours a week at the student union and have a table set up with all the brands set up. It was like a body spray brand and Ford, the car company, and Red Bull and Apple, and they were all set up on one table. And I just focused on having a really good relationship with the student union so that they would always let me in. So by the time I graduated, I was the only person who was allowed to do that student union setup without paying the university. And I was getting paid for 4 different big companies. And so for me, it was always important to say, I like money. I want to do things I like, and I want to have some control over my time. So how do I optimize that amount that I'm spending on work so that I still have a little bit more freedom and flexibility and I don't feel like money and work sort of consumes my life?
So I'm loving everything that you're sharing. Question before I jump to the juice, okay? Does somebody have to be really smart in order to emulate success as you've shown it? Not to copy you, but to emulate the steps, the strides, the approaches, the theories and strategies you've implemented.
I don't think so. I think that it is, look, if you want to be a brain surgeon, you are hopefully very, very smart. But when you look at sort of the people who make often, who have the most success in business, they're not necessarily the smartest. They're people who are really good at understanding, sort of what their end goal is and how to get there, and to not be sort of distracted. I mean, I remember in college, to keep talking about that for a second, so many of my friends worked at like these bars, and the bars were really cool, and they were like cool girls because they like knew everybody. They could always, but they were spending so much time working and they weren't really making more money than me. And so I said I would much rather be a campus rep for Apple Computers, which was, this was pre-iPhone. This was like not cool at the time, because I am making more money faster. And so as long as you are very clear on what you want, and you are willing to sort of hustle and show up and work hard, I don't think that it's a raw intelligence thing. I'm a really smart person, but a lot of my biggest wins financially have not come from sort of raw intellect. Sometimes you can be too smart for your own good, and you can lose money because you sort of almost overthink things.
I love, love, love that you're transparent in sharing that. You can accept that you're smart. You're also smart enough to know that it didn't take smarts to do it. It took some other stuff too, some of the stuff you learned early on. Now, a lot of people say you're either really dumb, even now, they say you're really dumb to get into Bitcoin, or wow, you gotta be smart to get into Bitcoin. You got into it in 2013, way before people were really talking a lot about what it is in the general population. That took a little bit of vision and probably a lot of guts. What drove you to see that opportunity when others didn't, do you think? And more broadly, Sarah, how do you develop an instinct for spotting what's next before it becomes obvious, especially in the world of finance?
Yeah. So, my Bitcoin investing sort of genesis story could not be more random. I had worked for the Winklevoss twins, and they've gone on to become some of the first Bitcoin billionaires. And I was out at a dinner with them, at a group dinner, during like Fashion Week in New York. This was not a business dinner. We were out with a bunch of friends, and somebody stopped by to talk to them, at the dinner, and they're chatting with this guy, and we're all like going out, it's Fashion Week dinner, right? And but they're talking about this thing and like math and equations and blah blah blah, and the guy leaves, and I was like, I don't understand, like what were you talking about, because I'm nosy. And they were like, oh, we learned about this thing this summer called Bitcoin, and they kind of explained it to me. You'd use math to make money. And I was like, I don't really get this. But okay. And then I kind of kept it in the back of my head, and I would sort of talk about it with other people who, if I ran into sort of, if I went out on a date with a nerdy guy, I would be like, have you ever heard of Bitcoin? Right? Because these are the only people who were talking about it at the time. And we'd chat about it a little bit. And then I started to see that over time, the price was going up and up and up a little bit. And I didn't have very much money at this point. I was working, in business development for small startups. I was, not making a lot of money, but I kept hearing about it. And it got to the point where I decided, it had gone up enough. This was maybe over 6, 8 months, and people were continuing to talk about it, that I was going to make a tiny little investment. And it was like $50, $100. It was something very, equivalent to like a night out in New York. And I said, okay, I can spend one Saturday night of my life in, and I can put that money towards a little bit of an investment. And, if it doesn't work, that's fine. I've always looked at, investing in cryptocurrency as sort of my Vegas money, right? So whatever I would spend playing poker or in Vegas on the slot machine, that's the amount I'll spend on crypto, not sort of my life savings. But I put a tiny bit in, and then I sort of just watched it over the next few years go up and up and up and up and up. And then I ended up selling some because I needed money for something else. And at that point, I think it was like almost 10, it had gone up like 10 times or something. And that was over a couple of years. And then since then I've been buying in, because I broadly think that there is a market for Bitcoin. I've also lost money. I remember once my bank called me and was like, why are you trying to send a couple $100 to a crypto exchange in Canada? Like, you are not doing this. And so, I've lost money in the big crypto exchanges that have kind of gone bankrupt overnight. That used to happen all of the time, and you would lose a little bit of money. So it was never something that I saw as like, this is all in, because that would be crazy on so many levels. There's so many different ways people have lost money in crypto. But I was curious about it, and I looked at my little budget and I said, I can afford to stay in one night and buy, one round of drinks worth of crypto. And the funny thing is, if I had stuck to that, probably would have been good for my liver, but it also, I would be worth hundreds of millions from crypto now if I had just kept that going every week.
Wow, wow, wow. And that's a point that I want to lean in on because obviously people are afraid of Bitcoin. Why do you think they are? And, before you even go there, just for our family listening, explain to them what it is because there's a lot of myth around what Bitcoin is and is not, especially today as people have tended to politicize Bitcoin.
Yeah. So I always like to joke because people will ask me this, isn't Bitcoin bad? Isn't it, used for money laundering or terrorism? I always tell them, wait till you find out about cash. Wait till you find out about cash and about gold. And, right? So,
Let me laugh. Let me laugh. Okay, I want to hear everything you're saying, but Sarah, you're this really smart, serious, thoughtful person, and then you like drop the mic. Wham! Wait until you find out about cash. Okay, please go.
but it's true, right? Because when you think about it, bad actors, people who want to do bad things, will always find ways to do bad things and to finance the bad things they're doing. And I certainly don't think that that means that anything that can be used to a bad end is bad, right? And I don't think that there's any inherent intrinsic good or bad when it comes to money, right? In any form. If I hand you a bar of gold or $100 bill, is that good? Is it bad? It's just money at that point, right? And so I've always pushed back against this sort of idea that it's inherently bad. I know that people have environmental concerns. The way that I look at it is everything you do in life has an environmental impact. I don't use AI that much, and it's not because of the environmental impact necessarily. It's just that I AI can mess up. And so it's just sort of easier if I'm going to have to go find the source of truth anyway, I'll just start there. And that's a personal choice for me. So, you can say that I use my sort of my environmental karma on crypto instead of AI, right? Or some people never fly on airplanes or, other people fly all the time. It's just, if you eat meat, if you live in the world, you are like, just as we talk right now, there's a lot of gas that's heating up the ozone, right, coming out of our mouth. So I don't agree personally with some of those sort of big, broad concerns. I think that, and then to step back in terms of what Bitcoin is, the way to think about it is almost like when you play Tetris in reverse. So when you play Tetris, right, the game, you fit the blocks, and then when you fit the blocks, the line disappears. But imagine that fitting the blocks, so you've solved that puzzle, the line disappears. Imagine that when you solve that puzzle, you got a penny. So every time you solved a line in Tetris, you're getting a penny. That is functionally how crypto works. The way that Bitcoin specifically is mined is that there are a bunch of computers, and this is where the environmental tax cost comes in. There are a bunch of computers that are solving these equations, right? So picture like a equation that's as long as, like, I don't know, the encyclopedia. And when that math equation is solved by these computers, a tiny bit of Bitcoin is released into the world. And I will explain it while also saying it matters about as much as understanding how your dollar was physically made, right? So, like, most of us don't spend a lot of time thinking what's sort of over time the cloth versus paper content of a dollar, right? Kind of the same thing here, where you mine crypto. There's a finite amount that will ever be mined, and then the the value of it is really just the value we ascribe to it. So nothing has intrinsic value. If I hand you a $10 trillion bill from America, you're now the richest person in the world. If I hand you a $10 trillion bill from Zimbabwe in like the 80s or 90s when they had hyperinflation, that's worth about 50 cents. And so the reality is that money doesn't ever have an intrinsic value. The value is what you pay for it. And if you don't agree with me, think about Uber surge pricing, right? When you're like stuck in the rain after a concert. And so we choose to ascribe value to money. And just like the stock market, what is a stock worth? Well, it's worth whatever somebody's bidding on it that you're willing to sell it at, right? The clearing price. That's sort of how crypto over time has gotten its value. And it's the same way that, any currency gets its value. When you go to Canada or Mexico or London or wherever in the world, that same dollar buys different amounts of things, a different basket of goods.
So many people, and might I add, many intelligent people or financially successful people look at Bitcoin and they see it as a need to have a personal level of intelligence differently than they look at engaging in cash or credit card use. What do you say to them, or is there anything left to say?
You know, you
And do
it's
you agree?
No, I mean, it's part of your investment strategy. So people should invest. If you have any excess capital, you should invest. If you don't have debt, I would argue you should be investing a little bit. If you have debt, you kind of have to figure out what that looks like and whether or not, in general, if you have good debt like student loans or house, home loan, you probably still want to invest a little bit. If you have bad debt like credit cards, really high interest rate, you're probably better off paying that down before you start investing. But most people want to invest. And mostly what you invest in is sort of the stock market, like all of it, like the Fortune 500 or even bigger than that. You're putting your money in like an ETF or something, an index fund that basically says, here's every stock in the stock market in America or in America and London or in 20 different markets, right? So you're sort of just putting your money into that. And you should be doing that on a semi regular basis, experts would say, and like kind of don't look at it till you need it, right? Which hopefully is years in advance. And then maybe you put a little bit of money in bonds or in high yield savings accounts. So you're getting like 3, 4, 5%, depending on sort of what the interest rate is. And that'll come back to you on like an annual basis. You're not going to make a lot of money, but you're generally your money's like broadly protected. So those are sort of the two main things that people do. Everything else goes into this huge bucket called alternatives. And alternatives is everything from betting on a racehorse to buying a racehorse to breeding racehorses to buying real estate and being a just owning real estate to like being a landlord or being an Airbnb host or buying gold or I recently have seen some news stories about how because the price of luxury fashion is going up so much, a lot of women are starting to buy jewelry instead because they figure diamonds, gold have an intrinsic value that maybe a $5,000 dress doesn't. All of those are alternative investments. I think you should generally use your alternative investments as a place to have a little bit of fun and say, what am I interested in? Right. So if you love Taco Bell, then maybe you want to go invest in a Taco Bell franchise. If you love gold, or if you love the idea of having something that's a little bit less correlated to the market that you can kind of always sell somewhere, right? That you have it in hand, then maybe you're going and buying, a little bit of gold bullion. For some people, that's going to be crypto. And so you don't have to own crypto. If anybody tells you that, you don't. You certainly don't need to own like a meme coin or something that just popped up overnight that some, WhatsApp group is promising is going to make you a bunch of money. But if you're interested in crypto, if you're interested in things like Bitcoin, think of it like, in general, your alternative should be probably not more than like 10% of your overall investment strategy. And Bitcoin or crypto or any one thing should be some smaller piece of that. So if you're worth $100 and you put $1 into crypto, okay, like if you lose that, it's probably going to be okay. And if you make 10x that, now you're worth $110.
I love the way you are expressing this. And our family listening come from across the spectrum of industries and age groups. And I think that you're really opening up eyes for folks. One note on the jewelry thing versus the dress thing. Historically, some of the best dressed women across the world have been those who own very few dresses and gorgeous, gorgeous jewelry or accessories. So, you're really leaning into something that has some mindset behind it. It also has some proof. But I ain't hating on the fashion industry either. Let's step forward, Sarah. How was the jump for you into venture capital? I mean, that was a big leap. What was that conversation like with yourself?
It was really interesting. Because there's sort of two ways into venture capital. One is the very traditional path. So you work at a big investment bank, or you work at a big startup, and then a very fancy, very big investment banker, or not even startup. You work right at Google, you work at Goldman Sachs, and then maybe you go get an MBA at, Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School. It's very sort of by the book. And so many of my friends have wonderful careers in venture capital from that path. And then you get recruited to be a summer associate. Then you get the offer to come back. It's very sort of step by step. And I've done research actually with Harvard Business School on this. Something like 40% of VCs sort of follow that kind of path. The other 60% could not be more random. And so I got hired into venture capital because I was working at a startup and I was running business development, and we were running out of money, and the founders were like having, a lot of founder conflict. They were kind of fighting, and I was concerned because I still needed a job. And so I went and talked to a venture capital investor who I had met. And I sat down with her, and she graciously took a meeting with me, and I said, look, here's sort of the situation. We need to raise more money, would love advice, or if you guys are interested, like, this company needs help. And she was like, Sarah, you guys are out of money. You don't have a product that works. The co-founders are fighting. Your company is going to go under. This is the first startup you've worked at, so this is stressful for you. It's fine. This happens. But you seem smart. And I was based in New York at the time. They were in Silicon Valley. We want to learn more about New York. We want to learn more about retail investing, about tech, about sort of tech for like media, fashion, all these things that I worked in. Would you consult for us? And I said, sure, because again, I needed money. And so I took that consulting job. And it was really just sort of what I learned is it's almost like reverse business development, where instead of me going out to try to find people to get money from and business from, I was going out and finding companies to give potentially money to. And so the role that they gave me played strongly into the things I was already doing. And I didn't have the internal conversation about it was genuinely, this person is offering to pay me and I need money. So yes. And then once I got there, I realized, oh, this is a bigger opportunity, right? And so the contract turned into a job, and I was there, and I really realized that I like this. I could be good at this. And this isn't the kind of opportunity that comes along frequently. So I need to work really hard and really double down on what's in front of me, because this could be a huge opportunity for my career. And that's what ended up happening.
I think it's a beautiful and transparent story for our family listening. And, I believe you've talked about turning down safe marketing jobs in order to pursue venture capital. Now, that's terrifying for a lot of people. And a lot of people listening to you right now may be waging their futures against their courses of study and considering pivoting. Some of them want to pivot into the capital arena, whether it's venture capital or whatever. How did you evaluate the risk that you took? And what would you tell those who are listening who may be looking at their own safe careers, wondering if they should take a similar leap? Again, it may be around courses of study. For many who've been out there for a while, it's that everything is changing and, technology has changed. So what they went to school for doesn't even live anymore. How do you measure and evaluate risk in that scenario?
Yeah. So I think one of the things to understand is sort of the downside, right? What does the absolute downside look like? If you have a mortgage and you're supporting your parents and you're supporting your children, kids love food. I don't understand it, right? They want to eat like three, four, 5 times a day. So you probably can't say, I'm just going to like kind of go and figure out my own way. I'm going to leave a job that I have. I'm going to say no to a steady job or a steady paycheck, right? I wasn't in that situation. I was in my early 20s and I had no responsibilities. I was able, and I really looked at it that way, right? I didn't have financial help from my parents, but I knew that, worst case scenario, they still had a guest room in the basement that I could sleep in, right? And so I felt confident that those sort of safe jobs I was turning down once I was sort of on this consulting path, but before it had turned into a full-time job. And at other points in my career, that one, I could probably go find those safe jobs if I needed them. And then two, that I could always, like, if I really needed to, kind of go home and regroup for a little bit. And so I didn't have a lot to lose and I had a lot to gain. And so I personally think that you have to be realistic about um, your responsibilities in life. And I think you also need to be honest with yourself about your fear in life. So a lot of times what you see is people who have even more privilege than I did in that situation are terrified. But what if it doesn't work? Like, who cares? Who cares? Most things don't work, right? Who cares if it doesn't work? What's the worst that's going to happen to you? And I think that the idea of failing, the idea of what will people think, what will people say, what if I have to, like, I was a nanny in college.
Mhm.
I love kids. I could always be a nanny. And nannies get paid an insane amount of money. So I am
Trust, I know. I'm a new grandma. Trust, I
yeah,
know.
exactly. And so I just genuinely am not concerned about anything in life because until my commitments as an adult outstrip what I can make as a nanny, which in New York, San Francisco, that's 6 figures easy, I'm fine because I can always go do that. And the difference, I think, between me and a lot of people is I will go do that. I would be happy to go do that. And so when you look at it that way, I think taking risk feels a lot easier. I think risk feels hard when it's about perception. Um, and about vulnerability and all of that. That stuff that is like a you thing that you have to work on. I always say there's kind of two kinds of problems in the world: money problems and not money problems.
Right.
Money problems are great because they can be solved by money, right? Oh, you need money, go get a job and get money. Um, you can't always get exactly the amount of money you need, whatever, but a money problem is always solvable by money. A non money problem, Steve Jobs died of cancer, right? Like one of the richest people who's ever walked the planet, one of the smartest people, one of the most well connected. That became not a money problem because you can't fix that with money. And so, keeping in mind when you think about, I want to go pursue something different, do you have a money problem that's solvable? Because if not, then like if you have a money problem, figure out how to solve that. The other way to solve it is everybody has free time, right? So we all, no matter how busy we are, at very least sit on the toilet with our phones. You have multiple little 5 minute pockets a day, right? When you're commuting, when you're whatever, where you can be listening to, reading, thinking about anything you want, right? And so if you have TikTok or Instagram on your phone, you can also go on YouTube and listen to podcasts like this, right? And you can listen to, you know, most big universities now, top universities have great coursework that's free online and libraries are free, right? So you have to keep in mind that you don't necessarily have $1 million in the bank so that you can stop what you've been doing and go do whatever you want and immediately seem successful, which seem is very different than be. But you do have 20 minutes an hour, whatever a day that you can say, actually, I'm not going to play, games on my computer. I'm not going to scroll and keep up with the housewives. I'm going to learn something more, and I'm going to start small and go from there.
I love that so much. And keeping in line with your thought around how you evaluate, how you see risk and yourself in it, whether we're talking to those business owners who are listening to you right now, or those folk who want to jump VC, early VC. When you're evaluating founders, what separates the ones who get your attention from the ones who don't? Now, what I'm really asking is there something that immediately tells you this person has it, or is it more about the specific opportunity they're presenting? Can two things be true at the same time in this instance?
Yeah, I will tell you, my biggest reason to say no to founders is when people aren't, and even just with my time, right? Mentorship, whatever, is when people aren't coachable. And the reason for that is it doesn't matter how smart you are, how good you are, how much you know everybody, you know everything. There will always be, when you're starting a business from scratch, there will always be, I think it's the Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? When you get punched in the mouth, you're going to need to take some feedback. What do I do? How do I change this? How do I get through this? How do I deal with this? And for people who struggle, and it comes in different forms. Some people are just like really cocky, arrogant. They have like the worst energy ever. Like, no, thank you. But other people, they're so they can't tolerate the idea that they've messed up, that they've disappointed you, that something is wrong. They want to try to save face. They want to, not bother you. That's also a problem. What I need from a founder is somebody who will pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, here's what's going on. It's not great, or I'm concerned. What do I do? How do I think about it? And I want them to bring me solutions. I always tell people, don't bring me problems without solutions, right? It doesn't have to be the solution you pick, but hey, my car broke down and I checked the bus schedule and it's not coming for 18 more hours. And I could buy this flight, but it's kind of expensive. But I could blah, blah, blah. What do you think I should do is going to get you a lot further with me than like my car broke down. I'm like, okay, what are you doing? Right. So to me, you have to be coachable. If you're coachable and you're building a business in a market that has room for growth, if you're building in tech that has room to become $1 billion business, then and you have some good reason that you can win. So you either have worked in the industry, you have a deep personal understanding of the industry, or you studied that industry in school, then I at least think, okay, this is a credible founder. This is a credible person. Whether or not it's right for me personally, I'll want to be able to be helpful.
So there are some young college folk who follow me, and a group of them came up to me actually recently in DC, and they were like, "We want to invest. We want to pool our money to invest. What should we do?" My recommendation was that they talk to someone who's in that arena and not me. Just because I'm Auntie Jan and Ask JBH doesn't mean I have the answer, but I can direct you to the answer. What would your answer to them have been?
So I would ask them kind of, what's the goal, right? If the goal is really long term, a great sort of thing that people do with investing is they'll invest in things long term through their 401ks. And so I'm an investor through the retirement funds. I'm an investor in a company called Alto IRA that does this with everything from crypto to franchises to public markets to stocks and bonds. And so you invest it there, and it grows and grows over the course of whatever your career. And then when you're, at the age where you can redeem that, you pay lower taxes generally on it. So if you're thinking really long term, great. Think about how to optimize the fact that you're putting aside money that you don't need for the next 40 years. If you're looking at something that's sort of like you just want to sort of have a little bit of money invested for a rainy day for 5 years when you try to buy a house or whatever, then I would say think about like public markets. And I know that doesn't sound sexy, but the reality is that putting your money into public markets, putting your cash into high yield savings accounts, those are really good ways to slowly build wealth. For everybody who's a billionaire now from crypto, from Bitcoin, there are 10 other people who lost loads of money in other cryptocurrencies that, either things got hacked or it just didn't work out or there was a scam or whatever. There's always risk. And so,
Not because it was Bitcoin.
Bitcoin itself, here's a funny thing about Bitcoin itself has never been the source of a problem. So if you followed the FTX sort of scandal, implosion, Sam Bankman-Fried, all of that, that was a Ponzi scheme. And Ponzi schemes are bad because then eventually you run out of people's money and they lose their money. And so Ponzi schemes, it doesn't matter if you're Bernie Madoff or if you're SBF, when you do a Ponzi scheme, people are going to end up broke, right? But it had nothing to do with Bitcoin. The problem was that they weren't investing it in Bitcoin, they were doing a Ponzi scheme, right?
Oh, well, Sarah, now look, you've been at this game long enough to know that there are some real patterns. So let's talk about being wrong. You mentioned you've been wrong before. Thank you again for beautiful transparency. Now, we all have been wrong. Have you had any investments where you thought this is it? And then it didn't work out the way you expected because you hadn't taught yourself enough about it or hadn't followed your own judgment, rather followed your excitement. I guess what I'm really asking you is how do you change how you evaluate opportunities as you get deeper and deeper into investing for your, if you're younger, your nest egg or your investment portfolio versus I'm just still learning. At what point should you stop learning and kind of know? How do you how do you create a knowledge or a relationship with following patterns? Is that a
So
fair question?
it is a good question. And the funny thing is that a lot of times I like to say that money doesn't care how it's made. The way that people make money, and there's an example I always use, which is Instagram, right? So when Instagram sold to Facebook for $1 billion, like 2013, 2016, I don't know when, they had just raised money on a $500 million valuation. And then they turned around within like months and they sold for $1 billion. And everybody in tech said they're stupid for selling so early. Or they're smart for selling so early because that company would have never been worth $1 billion. So everybody thought that the Instagram team was really smart for selling and that Mark Zuckerberg was really dumb for buying it. Now Instagram has become this absolutely massive juggernaut. And so it is something that is obviously worth way more than $1 billion. And everybody thinks, oh, and so now people would say, oh, the Instagram team was dumb for selling. And really, Mark was smart for buying, right? And so with a long enough time horizon, every investment can look smart or dumb. If you paid attention to the GameStop saga and all of that, that was a great example of that, of up and down and up and down. And so
Hindsight 2020.
but it's not even hindsight. It's just the moment that you live in, right? Of like, where is this going to exit? There have been a lot of bubbles in the stock market, particularly with tech, the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s. I know people who literally, their friends went public in, like, call it January 2000. That was an amazing time to go public. 15, 16 months later, imagine having an IPO in October 2001, right? The World Trade Center has just been attacked, and there's this huge recession that just all of a sudden completely like grinds all tech to a halt. The people who wanted to IPO then often had companies that were more valuable than to the 2000 ones, but those companies literally never IPO'd. Those founders maybe ended up with nothing. And so a lot of it is you always want to feel good about what you invested in. And the reality is that you can make the most money on things that are sort of uncorrelated to how the investment is performing, and that are much more closely tied to what most venture capital investments, you end up either going public or getting acquired, what the acquirer wants, right? And by the way, you can be a company that has somebody who comes to you and says, I want to give you 20 billion, 50 billion, $100 billion, and a regulator can say no. And it's not just the US regulators, it might be the European regulators, it might be there's a problem in Asia, there's a problem in the UK. Now you can't do this deal. And so I know people who, you're sending them champagne, you're like, you must be so excited, your company is selling for billions of dollars. Then those deals don't happen. And so you better hope that you do not buy the Lamborghini until the cash is in the bank.
Right. And
You never know.
that speaks a lot to behavior. And just staying in line with that, what do you wish more entrepreneurs understood about the fundraising process? I mean, is there a gap between what they think investors want to hear and what actually is moving the needle for someone like you, or specifically you?
Yeah. So I think that sometimes founders, especially early stage founders, can get a little too cute for their own good. And what I mean by that is at the earliest stages, we want to understand here's the problem, here's the solution, here's why I'm the right team to build the solution, and here's how we're going to make you a bunch of money. And that's really kind of it. I think often what founders do is like really small things. One thing I absolutely hate, drives me up the wall. Like, please, if you're listening, never do this. People will send out a pitch deck and they'll have the names of their team, but they'll just have the first name, right? And so if you see a smiling face and it's Sarah, and Sarah is starting a venture capital fund, okay, like she looks nice. I don't know what's happening here. If you see Sarah Kunst and then you can Google me, you start to say, this person seems to know something about the topic that she's building in. And so just really small things like that, where people will want to not share a lot of information about what they're building right away. You kind of have to tell me what you're building, because I can't give you $1 million if I don't know what you're doing. And you thinking that like, oh, somebody's going to steal the idea, like probably not. And ideas are free, and it's execution.
And so many people I meet, and I attend these conferences, or people reach out to me, and their first conversation, I should say the first conversation is, will you help me? Their second conversation is, I can't tell you that because it may be stolen, my idea. And every great idea does not a great business make, but you've been pretty vocal about the systemic issues in tech. And I'm talking about racial bias, sexual harassment, these kinds of things you've spoken transparently about. It takes courage, I think, in an industry where relationships matter so much, for you to be outspoken. One thing I've noted is that you're thoughtfully outspoken from what I've seen of what you've said and your body of work. And you've not leaned in on any predetermined bias so much as how do people manage being successful investors while also balancing how they are advocates for change. Have you ever had to choose between speaking up and protecting a relationship? That's a business relationship. Or do you think the truth in what you say, and again, your ability to not place blame, rather put light to, is the answer there? What is your response to all of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that you have to be able to sleep at night. And I have insomnia, so I'm not a great sleeper, but you have to be able to sleep at night. And for me, I have always been very, I always have struggled with not the truth, or and like lying, I think is like the like weirdest, like most pathetic energy. I'm just not a liar, but like the I like the truth. And some people who are not liars prefer sort of comfort, or they want things to be comfortable, they want things to be calm, they want, for me, I need the truth. And so when you kind of know who you are, making those decisions, I think it's relatively easy. And I also know who I am in the sense of, I was all over international press like a decade ago, almost, for a Me Too situation, an investor who'd sexually harassed me. And I had already done a lot of press at that point. I had been on Forbes 30 under 30. I had, I am a great public speaker and I always have been. I was comfortable in speaking to a reporter and telling my story, because I was very comfortable with sort of the spotlight that would shine on me. It wasn't pleasant. It was not at all pleasant, but I knew that I had the right personality to speak up. If I had a different kind of personality, I might have still told a reporter that story, but completely off the record or on background. You can't use my name, whatever it is, right? And so I think for me, knowing myself matters. It's also kind of pragmatic. No one, I firmly believe that no one who is sexually harassing you, who's discriminating against you, whatever, is actually the person who's going to run you that check. They're just not. Right. And there's I think a Gloria Allred quote that like, if women could sleep their way to the top, there'd be a lot more women at the top. Right. And so the reality is that you don't stand to lose very much when you're in the position I was in. You don't stand to lose very much. Those people are not your friends. Those people are not going to help you. They're going to sabotage you one way or the other. And then the other thing is when you're honest and people can see who you are and what you stand for, good things also happen because people really tend to admire that. And, you know, out of some of those situations, I had people reach out to me and say, you know, wow, I always knew that you're like nice, fun, whatever, but I'm really impressed with your courage and your honesty and how you're handling this. And so, you know, good things can come out of it too. Um, and so for me, it's never been hard. It's also not hard for me to not speak up on everything because my day job is to invest in startups. It's not, you know, I am an activist in like a broad sense, but that's not my job. I'm not an elected official. Like that's not what I'm doing. And so I don't, if you go to my social media, I'm not weighing in on every last thing in the world that keeps me awake at night. Because that's not who I am. And I want to amplify the voices who do that well. But I know where I am in sort of my part of the world and where I can make change.
You know where your lane is. And Sarah, before we go to 4 for 4, let me say something and ask something. What I want to say is just on that last conversation you had, um, I'm excited to invite you to an opportunity. So we'll talk about that once we've completed this podcast. Inside of this podcast, here's the question. You've said you want everyone to own their own agency and to take up every inch of space they would like. Now, that's powerful in my mind. When you look at the next generation of entrepreneurs and investors, Sarah, what's the one thing you most want them to understand about building wealth and about creating good change, positive change?
I think that they're somewhat tied. You know, the literal answer for building wealth is time and market, which is as soon as you can start investing, you should, even if it's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of money. Because if you go to, I love Yahoo Finance, it's a free finance app, and you can look at the S&P 500 index over all time, and it's something from like the 60s or something. It's up like thousands of percents. If you put $1 in then, you'd have thousands and thousands of dollars now, right? And so when you look at the long chart, and the biggest advantage you have when you're young when it comes to investing is time. And so don't be in such a hurry to hit some milestone or make some money tomorrow that you forget that your biggest asset is time, and also personal time, which is you have the time and energy to, you know, sometimes people who are like lovely, like in college or like, you know, early 20s, no kids, not married, very little responsibilities, they'll say, you know, how do I have work-life balance? And I'm like, what do you need to balance, right? Like sleep, eat well, see your friends who hopefully you work with or work out with or whatever. And you know, make sure if you sleep 8 hours and go, you know, hang out with your friends for an hour or two, and then go for a workout for an hour, meditate for an hour on top of that, take a shower for an hour, you still have loads of time in your day, right? So how do you think about when you have that excess time, using it in a way that you're passionate about? And if building wealth is your goal, how do you use that to either, you know, get smarter or honestly get a second job or work overtime and put that money into investing, because that's going to probably get you the same place long term anyway. On the change side, I think it's understanding that you have a voice, and that the voice is not necessarily, it can be anything you want it to be, but if you live in a democracy, you need to be voting, you need to be bullying your elected officials, you need to be an elected official. If you We all have a friend who would obviously do great as an elected official. If you are not consistently telling them every time they do something well, they're organized, they're smart, they're caring about people, whatever it is, they're problem solving, you need to be in office, you need to run, you have a friend at university who hates the high school they went to and constantly complains about the school board. Great, go be on that school board or go be in the school board where you live, right? So I think that it's important to understand that the world, nobody has to be born, nobody gets to pick the timing they're born. There's so many crazy things about the world right now that can feel terrible, but you, especially once you're an adult, have every right, the exact same right from everybody from the president of America on down, to vote and to encourage other people to be involved in the system to make the world move the way you want it to move.
I love that. And in every conversation, whether about finance, currency, whatever, I tell people your vote is one of your strongest forms of currency. So I just love that you landed there without any political persuasion, one way or the other. Just the encouragement that democracy is so precious and it's a privilege to live in it. And it's a dismal shame if we don't exercise it to its fullest. Shall we go 4 for 4?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you 4 questions to which you'll get 4 answers. There are no wrong answers. And the first one is you get to invite 4 people to dinner. Doesn't matter from what time in history to present they lived. Let's keep them human people, though, in this age of tech. Okay, who's at your table and why?
Well, obviously Jesus, because he can turn water into wine, and I think that that is great for the budget. Um, and I, and I would say probably also Marilyn Monroe. I'm curious, like which version are you getting? Norma Jean? Are you getting Marilyn? I'm curious. I would say Obama, because I want the gossip on every closed door conversation he has ever been in. I don't care about the big world changing stuff. I just want the gossip. And then as my fourth person, I don't know, I might say my husband. I'm having dinner with him tonight because he's my husband, but I feel like otherwise he's like never, I'm like, I need him in the room so he can like hear all of it too.
Well, you know what? I'm going to serve you guys so I can be at that table, at least standing in the back. That's where you hear everything anyway, right? I love that. I love that so much, and I love your wit. It is. I just anticipated you coming on with so much joy, and you are fulfilling dynamically. I know my audience is just enjoying themselves right now. Shall we go 2 for 4? Okay. So, what 4 pieces of music? What 4 sets of music are you listening to right now, and why?
I've been listening to a lot of Beyonce because she is on tour, and I need that in my soul. I've been listening to a lot of like 1960s. So Marvin Gaye, I'm a huge fan of. I've been listening to a lot of
All
uh,
Marvin Gaye, or as with Marilyn, are you listening to insightful spoken Marvin Gaye and then sexual healing Marvin Gaye? Are you listening
I
across?
like I like the range. I think it's wild how much that man did in such a short amount of time that feels so different. And, how much of it came from where the different labels were pushing him versus what he wanted to do and all of that. So I'm really into 1960s music right now. Jimi Hendrix is, to me, the most patriotic thing you can do is listen to the Jimi Hendrix Star Spangled Banner. It is just great. And so really into kind of that era. And then I'm from Michigan, so I'm a Motown girl. So the Supremes are always on every list of mine.
I love that. I love that. What about books? What 4 books would you advise our family to read and why?
So a friend of mine just wrote a book called When We All Lead that's about millennials and Gen Z becoming leadership in business, politics, everything. So When We All Lead is amazing. I'm a huge fan of the poet Cleo Wade, and so have been rereading some of her books like Heart Talk. And then I read a wild and interesting book, especially for Americans, called Empire Land, about sort of what we all know what England did in America when they were sort of doing a lot of sort of building their colonies, but what was happening in India has completely blown my mind. I just didn't know. So
Note
Empire
to
Land,
self, Empire Land.
it
Note
is
to
it is
self.
wildly fascinating and just totally eye-opening. And then I really like this sort of textbook called Global Catastrophes and Trends. And it basically it predicts, you flip to a chapter and like you'll flip to it. It's so scary. It came out in like the early 2000s, and it'll be like, like worldwide like plagues and like whatever, and it'll be like probably between 2010 and 2020 because of global trends, blah blah blah. And you're like, oh, okay, so if I'd read this before, I would have been prepared for COVID, right? And so they just have that about all these different sort of climate, climate, immigration, migration, like anything you can think of. It's just a really well thought out book that explains the data behind, hey, because of the trends of the world we live in, if you want to sort of feel like Nostradamus, if you want to feel like you know the future, this is a book that I got from a list of books that Bill Gates loves. And the reason that everybody always thinks that Bill Gates is like the Illuminati and like, caused COVID, no, he just read this book and he knew that it was going to come.
Which, by the way, I love your book list. Note to self, last two books. Okay. I love it. Shall we go 4 for 4?
Yes.
And I'm just full of thank yous all over the place. You've already given some excellent insight. 4 for 4 is about advice. What 4 pieces of concrete advice do you offer our family listening now, and why? And Sarah, if it's advice that was shared to you by someone else, please give homage to the author.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite pieces of career advice that I feel like people don't always internalize is when you're doing a job, if it's not illegal or immoral, like just do it. Quit your job if you hate your job, but like while you're there, I think often we can get really caught up in sort of, I don't love it right now. Like it's not illegal, it's not immoral, like keep it moving. That is from my father. And a couple other pieces I will say are things I've already said. You should be aware of the fact that your excuses suck. So when you're making excuses, right? And it can be good. Like, oh, I can't run a marathon. Why? Because I don't have legs. Okay, that's a good one, right? But because I don't have time to try, like, okay, go out and spend your YouTubing time, like, starting to train for a marathon. That a friend named Kyle gave me that advice or feedback once, and I've taken it to heart.
And there are Special Olympics you can train for as well.
Absolutely, yes.
So, I mean, your theory holds regardless.
There's no excuse if you really want to do something.
Your theory holds.
Exactly. Yes, there's no excuse if you really want to do something. And then I would also say when it comes to wealth generation, money, it is a very long game. So start small, start now. If it's literally just putting like your change to one side and finding an app where you can buy into the market $5 at a time, like great, do it, because it does add up over time. Compounding interest is a beautiful thing. And then I think that the last thing I would say in terms of advice is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is there's such a focus on like longevity, like, oh, how are you going to live forever? And there's like a guy whose entire thing is like, don't die. I actually think that's bad advice. I think that the better advice is live, and don't think about sort of how do I prolong this sort of state of whatever I'm in, but what do you actually want in life? What do you care about? What are you passionate about? And how do you make more of your everyday life look like that? Whether it's, moving or getting a different job or starting something as a hobby because it can't yet be a career, whatever it is, how do you focus on sort of living more than just not dying?
Love it. You're looking at a 73-year-old woman whose life has been so fulfilled, much of it by gift of angels, a lot of it by prescribing some of the very same virtues that you espouse. And I have just loved this conversation with you. Want to invite you back. In front of that, thank you from my heart to your home. Thank you so much, Sarah Kunst.